criminal and dehumanizing to the greatest extent. Now, as we speak, you like to throw, for some odd reason, especially right-wing analysts, they try to throw around the name Iran and everything to scare off people, gain sympathy, and as such. Well, I'll tell you something. Jenin refugee camp specifically is dominated by Fatah. Fatah has no relations whatsoever with Iran. We stand on the opposing, even regional alliances. We are not by any shape, way, or form even close to Iran. Iran has some ties to some forces, but they are not
Dimitri,
dominant.
I have to apologize here and cut in on you guys. Dimitri Giuliani, I do appreciate joining the wider discussion on this here, but news is upon us here in Tel Aviv today. That's what we're covering. Dimitri Giuliani, thanks for joining from abroad, or Issachar as well. This has obviously been a lot to discuss around the ongoing operation in Jenin. So, but from that, though, we do bring your attention right back here to Tel Aviv. Again, details now emerging, more video footage as well from the scene. It doesn't look good at this point. There are definitely some serious injuries involved in what's been described as a car ramming attack, possibly a shooting as well. Again, several injured. We don't know a lot about the nature of this right now, but the country is certainly on edge, again, as a wide-scale counter-terror operation is underway in Jenin as we speak. It's already day 2, as we've detailed here. Clearly, that raises tensions, and the specter of counterattacks or terror attacks in general coming out of this situation. Or you're still with us in the studio here and with your eye on local security issues and this conflict. Obviously, Tel Aviv, a top-level target. Are we seeing, the dangers just emerging today? These are the things we've been worried about seeing happening.
Right now, this is a soft belly of Israel, and we're just learning about this right now. And this has always been the way. First of all, I really hope that the injured would be for safe recovery for all those who were injured. And I think this is precisely what this quote-unquote armed struggle is about, the striking the soft belly in civilian settings, because right now what we're seeing in Israel is a legitimacy on the part of the vast majority of the public to the government, to the security forces to operate. And I think the goal of terrorism, as the famous idiom says, is not to kill many people, but to make more people know. So not many people are killed, but many people are aware. And I think the story of legitimacy, public legitimacy, is here that is targeted by terrorism. And it's important to be aware of that and not to let it influence us. But for the most part, I think it would be sadly evident that this kind of incidents would occur once the IDF targets terrorist infrastructure.
Look, in so many recent weeks, even months, well, not entirely. I mean, there's been a lot taking place in Tel Aviv, but a lot of this violence, a lot of the terror attacks have been contained to the areas around the West Bank. Settlers, obviously, the closest targets to elements, say, coming out of Jenin here. Right. They drive down the road, they find Israeli settlers, they find Israeli army posts. These are easy targets for them. Right. Is Tel Aviv the prize, essentially for the Palestinian terrorists? Is this a top goal, for these organizations to be able to pull something like this off?
I think pulling off something like that would be a jewel in the crown, quote unquote, sadly, in the course of Palestinian terrorism, because what we see day to day around Judea and Samaria, and I've been to these communities recently as well, and I've been to the Knesset committee where people said who live around Judea and Samaria that they feel insecure, that they have, they think twice before leaving their communities, that they drive in the roads and they have drive-by shootings, or are other drivers who sort of wave their hands and curse at them or spit at them. And we have a 200% increase in stone throwing attacks in the past 3 years. We have shooting attacks and drive-by car ramming attacks. And I think people feel it very much in the way they conduct themselves around Route 60 and 90 and around the routes around Judea and Samaria. But in Tel Aviv, it's sometimes, for the most part, pretty hard to feel it. Right now, this is their goal, really, to make more people around Israel society be aware of the struggle. And I really hope that these things are handled.
Yeah, our heart goes out to the situation as well. So much unknown at this point. Issachar, thanks for being with us on this. A lot going on. Obviously, this is still an evolving situation on the ground here, so we're going to keep covering it for you. Not going out to the break as scheduled here, as we have this event unfolding before our eyes here. Tragic as is, exactly no break here at this point. We're covering this situation, so we're staying with it here. A live event taking place, what's being called a terror attack, a car ramming, possibly a shooting as well on the streets of Tel Aviv here. This is on the north side of town, so we're staying in touch now with all the updates coming from this scene. And again, obviously the backdrop, a major counter-terror operation underway, and no shortage of incidents leading up to to this, whether it be around these major, the attempts to get out, to perpetrate, so to say, get out and perpetrate attacks in the heart of Israel, always being attempted by these organizations, the IDF pushing back on them, going after them night after night, day after day. We know counter-terror operations are thwarting attacks all the time. So again, we don't know much about the nature of this. At this point, the most updated numbers coming to me are saying there are 10 people wounded in this attack, and unfortunately 3 in critical conditions. This has been definitely a damaging attack here, and more appearing not to be an accident of some kind. So yes, these are the reports coming from the scene. Again, Tel Aviv. Yes, yeah.
So we can see that terrorism basically is the end result of the lack of sovereignty in the field. So people who throw stones at pass-by vehicles, people who commit shooting attacks or carry out other attacks. This is basically the result, the end result of a whole generation that has not known the defensive shield operation in 2002, that has resorted into TikTok videos showing them throwing stones at soldiers. This is the lack of sovereignty in the sense of deterrence on the part of Palestinian youth. And but the whole process behind that end result is a disdain and disrespect to authority, both the Palestinian Authority and Israeli authorities. We're seeing the mass scale, my friend was mentioning Israeli settlements. We're seeing the mass scale of Palestinian settlements all around the territory, over 80,000 illegal structures in Area C, number of times fold the larger than the amount of Israeli settlements or communities. So we're seeing the sort of disdain toward authority among Palestinian youth, and widely respected and hailed by the Palestinian Authority itself in the media, on television. If you go to the Twitter of the Fatah Twitter page, you'll find, believe me, a hell lot of incitements. So I believe we cannot be, sadly, we cannot be surprised by the end result of what we're seeing today.
That is the tragic fact. I agree with you on that point here. There's definitely a wider environment that's creating these types of situations. Look, we have our correspondent Ariel Osran we go into right now to get some more on anything we might know about the situation. Ariel, at this point, I know this is an unfolding incident. Look, we're watching some of the videos that have come from the scene. Clearly, this is a relatively bad situation and people hurt. What do we know at this point, Ariel?
Right, David. So as usual, we need to tread carefully because we're talking about initial information coming from the scene. According to police and emergency services, we're talking about a suspected car ramming attack in the northern part of Tel Aviv. According to Magen David Adom, that's the emergency services, there are at least 5 wounded on the in the scene. There are conflicting reports that number may be a bit larger, but the official number so far, we're talking about 5 injured, and the police just issued a statement saying that the driver of the
Cut out there again. I'll recap what we know at this point here, looking at some of the videos emerging from the streets here. This is in the northeast part of Tel Aviv, we could call it, basically one of the suburb areas attached to the city here. But again, a busy road there, a lot of commercial activity, a lot of activity in general, certainly at the lunch hour today, midday, a lot of people on the sidewalks, and this is what looks to be a car ramming attack on the road there. To several injured, possibly 10 from what we've heard, some in critical condition. So again, a dismal picture emerging there, and this all in the backdrop of a major operation taking place in day 2 now in Jenin in the northern West Bank, a counter-terror operation we must emphasize here. This has gone after many of these rogue elements that have committed so many brazen attacks, mainly across the West Bank in recent weeks and months, deadly often, but this now being one of the first mass casualty incidents to emerge in Tel Aviv in some time. So we have our eyes closely on this. Clearly, we'll be sticking with this situation now as it's unfolding and developing as we continue our live coverage and broadcast here. And now I want to go back to our defense correspondent in the field, our senior defense correspondent, Jonathan Regev, who's, again, on assignment covering the IDF operation. This is now a bit action unfolding closer to us here, tragic as it appears, some major injuries. Jonathan, first of all, the backdrop of this operation still underway, in full steam up there in Jenin. What do we know about the IDF's activity and what happened today in Tel Aviv?
First of all, the activity is ongoing and nothing to give us a clear indication that this is about to end. Yes, it seems as if the IDF has achieved pretty much what it came in for, which is to preserve the freedom of movement within the Jenin refugee camp, meaning dismantle the IEDs planted on the road. It involved a lot of engineering infrastructure, basically ripping off the roads to detect the IEDs that were under them. Also detect a lot of the infrastructure within the Jenin refugee camp, even inside mosques where IEDs were made and hidden. That's as far as Jenin. For the moment, this is continuing. And while this is happening here, we spoke yesterday about the fact that Israel is clearly concerned that the operation here in Jenin could result in other arenas as well. And what we're seeing now in Tel Aviv is perhaps the indication of that. It already happened yesterday. There was a stabbing attack in the city of Bnei Brak, just outside of Tel Aviv. And today, what appears to be a car ramming attack in Tel Aviv. Still details coming in. And not exactly clear if this is a car ramming attack or a car ramming and shooting attack. From the reports we're hearing, not confirmed. We have to say the terrorist, the man carrying out the attack, the terrorist is dead. No confirmation for that at the moment. These are reports coming in. Another anything between 5 to 10 people injured, various conditions, not exactly clear, and also not absolutely clear if this is a car ramming attack or a car ramming and a shooting attack. We have to remember this happened 15 minutes ago, so details are still coming in all the time.
And certainly, Jonathan, thanks for the updates again here. I'm looking at the images again for our viewers. Clear there's been some carnage on the scene there. Public benches tore out of the ground, trees uprooted, and bodies on the ground. So it is a grim scene so far from not too far from us here, the northwest side of the city, relatively, where again this looks to be a terror attack perpetrated by someone in a vehicle here. As far as we know, that attacker has been killed at the scene. So we're waiting to hear more reports on the nature of the injuries. I want to introduce our international affairs correspondent, Batya Leventhal, is in the studio. Join us as well. And always staying with us here. Obviously, a little bit of a change of plans as we're on air here for everyone tuning in here. This is something we're always on edge and ready for, Batya, but again, upon us right now. You describe the nature of, the public already, all eyes on Jenin here, thinking, hey, there could be attacks right now. People kind of, at least, I know walk around the city, I don't want to say expecting, but wary of these types of things happening. In some ways, a worst case scenario emerging already just today.
Absolutely. There's almost sort of this cloud that emerges when there is an operation within the West Bank, which, mind you, this is the first of its kind in terms of a major wide-scale operation in the West Bank, in Jenin, in 20 years. But it also happens when there's flare-ups on the Gaza border in the south, or flare-ups on the northern border with Hezbollah, that there's this huge misconception as well that it's only people in the south or people in the north, people close to these areas that need to be wary. We know that there was a concert in Sderot yesterday that was cancelled because they were worried about possible retaliation from either Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad coming out of the Strip. But the misconception is the fact that even here in Tel Aviv, among even our own colleagues, there is this, as you mentioned, the sense of wariness of there is an operation going on now. We know that there's bound to be a response, a retaliation, something coming out of it, and it could likely hit cities that are not necessarily close or even remotely part or connected to what's going on with IDF operations. What really, I think, stings for a lot of people is when something like this happens in a city like Tel Aviv. We're talking about a very liberal city, a city where the majority of voters that at least are registered voters tend to lean more towards the center, tend to lean more towards the left. This is not disputed area necessarily the way that Jerusalem is claimed to be or said to be by certain sides. This is very much all the embassies, at least before they move, are situated in Tel Aviv. This is not an area that has any sort of disputed jurisdiction with regards to international bodies. And so to see an attack like this, it's almost hard to swallow that international communities, the Arab world, wouldn't condemn something like this, even if it's coming as a response to what's going on in Jenin.
Batya, well put. Thanks for being with us again on this. As we're rolling with the live coverage around this, and just a quick mention again to our viewers, anyone coming in now, you're seeing some of the images that have come to us from the scene of this attack just on the northwest side of the city here. Again, at least some 10 injured. We know the attacker is dead. Not much more known around that. We're joined as well, though. I want to introduce another guest joining us right now, Amir Oren, security, international affairs analyst, being with us. Amir, thanks for joining. Look, this is obviously hijacked our narrative today in some ways, this attack in Tel Aviv, but something that has been clearly in the back of our minds coming into this now. Now, what are your first thoughts, just this last hour as you see these reports emerging?
So first of all, it has been confirmed that this is or has been a terror attack, not an accident and not a criminal act per se, but the police have officially described it as a terror attack. Now, the neighborhood is one of Israel's high-tech hubs and quite an advanced science facility. A few hundred yards south of there is the Ayalon Mall, where thousands of people are congregating now during the holiday. And had the perpetrator had explosives and tried to sabotage the mall, we would have seen many more victims. So fortunately, even though people were hurt, at least one very badly, this is not a massacre. And in any event, one should wait and see for the identification of the body to see, first of all, whether this is someone who came from the Jenin area or someone with a work permit who was considered safe but was radicalized by the operation and on the spur of the moment decided to use his freedom of movement to hit Israelis.
It's really a lot of potential scenarios around this. Look, I want to just jump in with a little bit of update. We know the Prime Minister at this point is convened his security team, his cabinet. They're talking about the situation right now. And again, as you mentioned here, this is at least one person in critical condition here. So, and I think we're seeing signs already that Hamas is touting this attack, celebrating it, even claiming to have some connection to it at this point. So, Amir, on another side of this here, the international community, let's just call it that, have been all eyes on us in these last days here in Israel, conducting this operation in Jenin already. Condemnations, I think, the best way to describe the reaction so far. Where does an incident like this in Tel Aviv, fit in that picture? Does it provide Israel at least some justification in the moment to say, hey, this is what we're out to stop. This is the reason why we're out there fighting. Does it fit? Does it help? I don't want to say help, but does it lend to Israel's narrative of we're facing real threats?
Well, not really. First of all, this is the 4th of July. And most people, at least in America, are not interested in foreign news. And if they are, they focus on Russia, on other problems domestically, on the Supreme Court decisions, on the Philadelphia shooting. And only down the line, you see coverage of the Jenin operation. And there, a very interesting dimension is that there is some suspicion of the veracity of Israeli announcements, not because they suspect that the military is lying, but because the government, as the Washington Post, for instance, calls it, is a right-wing government which set out to act against Jenin in particular and has recorded the highest number of Palestinian casualties over the last 6 months. So they tie together the domestic upheaval here in Israel with the professional military, and that's to the detriment of the IDF spokesman, whose announcements are usually considered more credible than the political spokesperson.
Amir, thanks so far. I'm going to just update our viewers a little bit here. Again, this has just happened in the last hour, this car ramming attack now with reports emerging that some of the injured might have stab wounds as well, or coming to the hospital with stab wounds. So to get a little bit more of the picture emerging. Or, yes, your thoughts, as all this is unfolding and you've been within the studio, this jumped upon us like everyone else in the nation.
Yeah, like so many things happening in this country, and of course, sad and grim images, as you said. But look, I think your question about the international community's response is right in place. And I'm interested to know if sort of the moral equivalence that has been going on in recent years is going to be continued. And I think the international community cannot keep this moral equivalence going. I think it's regardless to one government or the other. I think once we see that following a deadly attack near Ali, where 4 people were murdered, teenagers, civilians, in a civilian setting, and the European Union, the United Nations, the U.S. State Department are all sort of putting in the same basket the damage of vandalism, the damage for property by part of some Jewish groups around Judea and Samaria, and that's, of course, that's condemnable, and it should be addressed.
Statements, sort of, yeah, but violence on both sides. There was a lot of that dancing around.
I haven't seen one Palestinian murdered by an Israeli settler in the past 5 years. I don't think we can put both of them in the same basket. People who are committed to an armed struggle, murder civilians in a civilian settings, and injure people, like in Tel Aviv just a few minutes ago, cannot be equivalent cannot be compared to IDF soldiers operating against terrorist infrastructures. And likewise, as we just heard, that a record number of Palestinians have been killed, a record number of terrorists have been killed, and we need to ask ourselves why that is. Maybe we have more attempts on the part of Palestinian militant groups to carry out attacks, or we have a growing confidence in the weakness of the Palestinian Authority. So we cannot, the best way to assess it is from a several years perspective of looking back and seeing we had a variety of governments in the past few years, and we haven't seen any sort of trend or shift on the part of the international community. So this sort of moral equivalence needs to stop, and the people who, or countries who consider themselves democratic and liberal, just like Israel is, need to start picking sides when it comes to murdering civilians as opposed to targeting terrorists.
If I may interject here just a moment, I think what you point out is a huge issue, and I think it also comes down to the international community is incredibly and astonishingly bad at putting together a distinction, and I think that's where the very essence lies. Right. There's no distinction between Israeli settlers that a lot of people would consider extremists, as you mentioned, going into Palestinian cities, ransacking, burning, even being seen as some kind of a revenge or response to what had happened in Eli in a settlement a few days before. At the end of the day, that is one fringe of Israeli society, and then there is innocent Israeli society. Right. And the same thing tends to happen on the Palestinian side, where we have Palestinians that are involved in an armed struggle, that are somewhat connected to Hamas, are connected to the PIJ. Right. And that is not the same as innocent civilians. And there's very much this narrative that never gets drawn on the Palestinian side, but we also find that it happens a lot on the Israeli side. And I think that whether that is down to ignorance on behalf of the international community, whether that's down to some sort of agenda, a rhetoric, a narrative, whatever you want to call it, there does need to be not necessarily a moral standard of calling out both sides, but there needs to be a deep understanding of this region that is so volatile, so complex. And when we call out that the international community needs to get involved, I think we should be saying you need to get involved if you understand what's going on here, because if you don't, you're creating more problems in a region that already has its own problems than anything else.
Or it does feel like there's a sort of diplomatic clock ticking on the IDF's ability to operate in the heightened way that they are right now in Jenin. The sort of called diplomatic capital. I'm not sure how deep that account is for this Israeli government around the world. Major factor constraining even Israeli activity right now?
Yeah, no, I fully agree that the level of diplomatic capital, as you call it, in the part of for the Israeli government and the part of the international community is not very high. And I'm not sure who is to blame here, but I do know that the Israeli government is not solely responsible for what's going on around Judea and Samaria. As you just said, we need to make a proper distinction between popular terrorism and encouraged terrorism on the part of Palestinian Authority that we remember pays over $370 million a year as stipends to terrorists as a reward, even a upfront reward promised in advance to terrorists who target Israeli civilians. But we also see the sort of what I sometimes talk to groups from overseas, and I tell them my point is that I want you to make your own assessment. I want you to have the totality and the entirety of information, of relevant information, to help you make your own assessment. If you only hear about Israeli settlements who are approved by the government, and you don't hear about 80,000 structures who are illegal on the Palestinian side, and in Area C, where the European Union is witness to the Oslo Accords, in standing clear violation of the Oslo Accords, then you don't have the full picture necessary to assess what's going on here. If you condemn a violation violence on the part of Jewish settlers going into Palestinian villages and set vehicles on fire. And I join you in condemning violent attacks. Of course, it's condemnable. The question is, if you are not aware of the thousands of olive trees uprooted by Palestinians, of fields set on fire, owned by Jewish population and are set on fire by Palestinians, if you're not aware of stone throwing attacks that have been, as we said, 200% increase in the past 3 years, Molotov cocktail throwing and car ramming and shooting attacks, all of these people around Judea and Samaria have been suffering increasingly over the past year. And so you don't have the full picture to assess what's going on in the Middle East. So the sort of understanding and the proper, sober assessment of the situation, and it's a complicated one between Israelis and Palestinians, is not given the full stage. If certain media outlets say that a Israeli settler set a Palestinian vehicle on fire, the ethnicity and nationality are very clear. But we say 4 Israelis murdered in a West Bank shooting, as if little green men descended from Mars and carried out a shooting, and not making a clear, even moral, but also a clear political or policy demand from the Palestinian Authority to get its grip together, to get its act together, and start combating these terrorist attacks rather than paying terrorists.
Definitely more discussion for both of you. Thank you so far contributing. This is our live breaking broadcast that we're in here. And if you're just joining us, we are joined right now by Raphael Posch. He's the international spokesman for the United Hatzalah Rescue Service. Raphael, thanks for coming on the program with us. Obviously, circumstances grim here. Look, what do we know? It's hard to discern exactly what took place in Tel Aviv at this last hour. What can you tell us?
Well,
I want to just jump in. Sorry, Raphael, to tell our viewers, these are live images coming from the streets of Tel Aviv right now. So we're all catching up on this at the same time. Yes, Raphael, what happened out there?
So our volunteers who were actually quite close nearby when the attack occurred drove over there with their ambucycles and saw what was going on. And they said they heard from the people who were on the street that the car had rammed into some of the people at a bus stop. There were gunshots that were heard. And they immediately started treating the injured people who were around. We have numerous people of varying degrees, including one person in serious condition. And they immediately also called for backup for more resources. One of our ambulances made it over there. And they transported all of the injured people to the hospital as quickly as they could after receiving initial treatment at the scene. Thankfully, helping keeping the injuries down. Our psychotrauma and crisis response unit was dispatched to help deal with people, the emotional trauma on the fallout. Obviously, when these things happen, they take a very serious emotional toll on everyone who witnesses it, who hears it, who gets exposed to it, who even comes by and sees it later. And from that perspective, we're trying to really treat everyone who's affected by it in any way.
Yeah, we're getting some of the images here, Raphael, again, more details emerging from the scene, and thank you for giving more of that to us as well. Look, from the rescue perspective of this, is there a heightened level, in the backdrop of a major IDF operation, is there a heightened level of readiness for rescue services, or is it, hey, always ready for these kind of things?
We're always ready for any incident that sort of comes our way. We obviously do sometimes have heightened readiness, usually in an operational standpoint of sending more resources to a certain location. The volunteers have been made aware over the past couple of days that there is a heightened state of tension. Obviously, we all hear it in the news as well. Operationally, things have been considered to be going the same because there hasn't been a specific region where we need to send extra resources to. But everyone is a little bit more at the ready than we usually are. Although we're always there 24/7, so that basically just means your adrenaline's more pumping continuously as these things happen.
You touched on an important part, Raphael, about the volunteer corps. Look, let me shed a little more light on the volunteer corps, how critical that is for nationwide response. I think with Magen David Adom and United Hatzalah, the volunteer corps, a critical component. If you can just shed a little light on that, the types of people who are out there who are saving lives right now, volunteers.
Yeah. So the volunteers, it's a very interesting mindset to have. We have 6,500 volunteers around the country. Everyone's at pretty much the state of ready to go whenever there's a medical emergency that pops up. We drop what we're doing and we respond to the medical emergency. We managed to cut down response times across the country to less than 3 minutes, and in major city centers in 90 seconds. That was put into practice today, where the response was very, very quick. Also, less than a minute, there were first responders already at the scene. and who were able even to hear the gunshots and see what it was taking place when the person who committed the attack was killed. And they're already, they're moments later, stepping profusely from an injury or a wound, receiving treatment very quickly will often save that person's life and prevent further tragedy from taking place. So
absolutely, time
we're
critical,
thankful
seconds
for volunteers for their dedication.
Yeah.
And of course, the volunteers go through a trauma of seeing these things and being exposed to them as well. So one of the other missions of our psychotrauma unit is to treat the volunteers and make sure that they're okay after responding to an incident like that. There's a whole protocol of how to do that exactly. But that's something which is very important, knowing that these people are just like everyone else, going about their daily lives. They drop what they're doing and they get exposed to something like this. We don't want them to take that home with them, God forbid, and suffer trauma themselves. So it's something we're very much taking into account. We both treat the patient, and then we have to make sure the responders are able and ready to go, for the next call that comes out.
Unfortunately, extensive experience in that realm, I know, for you and all the rescuers out there. Look, Raphael Posh, thanks for being with us again on this. We'll try to stay updated as we can here. We're sticking with this incident now live as it's unfolding, as this occurred while we are here for our show. Again, at this point, there are injured people in critical condition. We know that from the attack. The scenes obviously indicating a really violent situation there as a car ran people coming off the road here, a busy lunch hour in a commercial area here in the northwest side of the city. Some people, again, in critical condition. We're still waiting to get more detail from the hospital, from sources at the scene about just what took place and the ramifications as well. I want to come back with a bit of international perspective on this, and still in the studio with Bhakti Leventhal, international affairs correspondent. Bhakti, you talk about the need for the world either to understand or not, or there's so much. It's a complicated situation here. How do you look at Israel's efforts to explain things right now? The outreach essentially from the IDF, not always a strong point for Israel in times like this. Are there pieces lacking right now? Does there need to be a more robust information campaign? How does it compare to the anti-campaigns that are out there?
Israel's Hasbara, or public relations as it would be, supposedly translated into English, has dramatically improved over the years. When certain instances like this happened, there were two sort of forces that were in play. The first one was the IDF doesn't need to have to respond or to justify any of its situations. Its citizens are in danger. It is going in to assist and to root out terror. It's as simple as that. The other side of this very much touches on the fact that there was a need to sort of explain why they're doing it, because it's not a matter of, context is very important. It's not a matter of we're talking about IDF walking into the West Bank and deciding today is a good day to, go and interrupt people's lives, to have a shootout, to have clashes. There's specific targets that it's going for. And it's like we've been told now today, the numbers are important. We're looking at a situation where we've been told that 120 terrorists have been arrested, and that there's 10, we don't know necessarily whether they're actual terrorists or whether they are targets, whether they are explosive or munition bunkers, but there are 10 more sites and targets of which the IDF needs to go and deal with. This is a numbers situation, and the reason for that, and you'll also notice over the years that there's always this IDF sort of video that goes out explaining, if you have a look at Jenin, have a look at the area which this is being located in. Doesn't it strike you as very similar to what's going on in Gaza, that the areas that we're striking are next to hospitals and UNRWA schools? So all of this very much plays into that narrative. Now, while Israel is very much taking those two forces hand in hand, on the one hand, we don't need to have to explain this to other people. On the other hand, yes, they do, because if they need funding and assistance from the United States, there does have to be that explanation, but also from the West and from Europe. But on the other hand, the Palestinians are playing the very same game. They are playing the very same game when it comes to their PR. And so this could be, it shouldn't be seen as a game of public relations between the two sides. But when the international community is getting involved, it sort of has to be, because as I said earlier, there isn't a deep understanding. There's no distinction. And so whatever information you're putting out is being absorbed.
Bhakti, thanks for, again, that perspective critical in a moment like this, especially, again, as incidents live upon us, just to bring our viewers up to speed here. If you're just tuning in, no, we are not stepping out for a break at the end of our program. We have a live breaking terror attack that we're covering here in Tel Aviv. This is northwest side of the city here, a commercial area. Very busy this time of day. What's been described so far as a car ramming and stabbing attack. And I believe some new detail just emerging, or at least most importantly, the details. 7 people injured, 3 in serious condition at this point, fighting for their lives. We know that. The attacker apparently killed at the scene. And some details emerging now that it was an individual known to police, a resident of the West Bank. So many questions around that. We have a new guest in the studio with us now, Rafael Yerushalmi, security analyst, long time perspective on all these issues. Rafael, thanks for joining us on this. Look, this incident happening today as this operation is going on in Jenin, are those dots connected as clearly as they appear to be? How do you look at this?
It's most probably connected. Yesterday we had an incident in Bnei Brak with a teenager attacking people with a knife. It is going to be very difficult to detect these very spontaneous surges of anger and desire of revenge. It's not like you're monitoring a professional terrorist cell preparing a coup or an attack. You really, I think this person was driving in his car and just decided to run people over. Yeah. It might be completely unprepared or super well planned, which I doubt. We have to know now what this is. What is this vehicle? Is it a stolen vehicle? Is it the person's vehicle? Is it coming from the West Bank, or is it a yellow plate? You know, this is the main. Usually, it's the main indication. We are checking still if there was a shot or not a shot, meaning there were shots because he was neutralized by passers-by who were armed.
I'm not sure if that's just security force.
Yeah, but maybe some of the shots were from the car, because of late, as you know, this is the new way of operating of the terrorists, is to shoot from a passing car. So this has to be checked. As they have the corpse, it's going to be quite easy and fast to identify. Of course, the Hamas has already not claimed responsibility. They haven't claimed responsibility, but they lauded the event, and they think it's great, and let's hope everybody imitates that. And that's the real danger, the copycat, the fact that this will inspire others to do the same. Very dangerous situation. We were alert. We knew that these things might come, but we, as I say, they are much more difficult to detect and to stop if they come from spontaneous decisions of unknown factors, unknown elements.
Look, significantly, of just getting the information in my ear that the assailant's been identified as a 23-year-old man from the South Hebron Hills, so a West Bank resident here. Again, known to police. We don't know much more about that.
We have to just also check if he has a permit or not a permit, because even though the operation was in full swing, permits were still standing. Yeah, people were going to work.
Israel.
Yes, tens of thousands of Palestinians coming to work in Israel. This young man have a permit, or did he manage to sneak through?
May force some questions about that policy, that leaving the West Bank and all these workers open during such a heightened period of tension and operation. I think there was a major humanitarian consideration there to collectively squeeze the Palestinians during this operation. It might have backfired. Again, we don't know that detail in this, but we do know, just to bring our viewers up to speed here, again, this is at least 7 people injured here from a car ramming, and what we're being described as stabbing wounds as well here. Some people in critical condition, at least 3 we know at this point, still fighting for their lives. And just to get more, on the repercussions, Rafael, on this, how does it look? This operation was ongoing already in day 2. I think a lot of people starting to question when was it going to wrap up, what was the end point. An incident like this now thrown in, an attack, thrown into this mix. Does it provide just more public support for this operation? Does it continue? What does it affect? Essentially something like this happening.
Yeah, I think the public support is there anyway, because of the wave of terror. The calculation, the assessments of the IDF will be only professional and security based, meaning that we're going to have to keep our cool and separate the 2 events. We know that there are going to be revenge acts and retaliations, but we have to finish the job. The IDF so far has decided to go on and complete the mission. They could decide to stop at any moment. This depends on the assessment. As the operation goes on, it becomes more and more dangerous for those who operate there. There are more and more chances of having collateral damage that we want to avoid at all cost. On the other hand, we have only a handful of targets left. And if we achieve this, then the operation is a complete, total success, and hopefully without any innocent Palestinian civilians being killed or wounded, and the same for our troops. That would be great. The fact that, on the other hand, somewhere else, last night and this morning, there were people who took over Joseph's tomb in Nablus and made an incident there. There was a cell that came near the border between Gaza and Israel, shot at Israel, and then run away back into Gaza. So we're going to have to expect this kind of incidents, unfortunately, for a while. The social networks on the Palestinian side are loaded with calls for revenge, and especially aimed at the youth, at young people. You saw yesterday at 17, today 23 youngsters who are being heated up by the hate propaganda. So we have to expect that. On the other hand, we have to continue the job, keep our cool, like even a civilian and passerby in the street today kept his cool and helped neutralize the terrorists.
Yeah, it looks like that played out on the scene again. You're seeing many of the images here. This live coming to us from the scene of that attack on the northwest side of the city. And this is all unfolding before our eyes as well, as this has now been described. This is the head of the Tel Aviv police, who seems to be taking to local media to make some comments. We'll bring you any updates that he ends up providing as well. But we're left wondering about the condition of the wounded here. 3 have been described as in critical condition. The attacker killed. Just again, bringing you up to speed, this was a car ramming and a stabbing attack based on these initial reports here. A young Palestinian, 23 years old, from the Hebron area in the Southwest Bank. The perpetrator, not much else known at this point. The nature of how he got to the scene and anything else is taking place. But that's what we're here for, covering this live as it unfolds. And we have a new guest joining us as well. He's an IDF colonel in the reserves here, Itamar Yar, is the former deputy head of the Israeli National Security Council as well. So thanks for being with us. Look, we already had a lot to discuss around this Jenin operation. Does an incident like this, an attack like this in Tel Aviv now, does this widen the IDF's ramped up operations across the West Bank potentially?
I'm not sure that there is any connection between the two events. People from the Hamas, and the Hamas leadership, in fact, they don't care about what we are doing because, to start with, they try to destroy the state of Israel, and every time that they have an opportunity, they try to attack us, with or without any Israeli operation. Of course, when this attack taking place during an operation in Jenin, you might think that there is a connection. Perhaps they see it as an opportunity, but they do these kind of things even without any operation. And we saw these kind of attacks in the last few weeks. And in fact, these are the main reason why Israel decided to have or to launch some kind of an operation in Jenin. It's exactly the reason for it.
What do you say so far, this Jenin operation? Does it look like the IDF's achieving its objectives? May even get out soon? What's it look like?
First of all, let's be frank, all of us. We don't really know what are the main aims of the operation. We'll know about it later, I believe. It seems that until now, the Israeli forces achieved much of what they expected. Is it all of them or not? How long will it take? I don't think that any comment now will be a wise comment. It seems that it will not be a very long operation, a very wide operation. Will it be finished today, tomorrow, in a week? Those that will guess, it will be only a guess.
What kind of pressures are on, the planners of this operation? Is it internal politics? Is it external, relations, international partners and allies? Where's the pressure point on this? Or does it appear that the IDF has got a free hand to do what it needs to do?
First of all, the IDF is acting under the government policy and government decisions. Having said that, the exact timing of going in and going out is, first of all, based on intelligence and operational opportunities. And this is also the reason to stop or to finish an operation. Having said that, of course, as long as the operation is a success and as long as the operation doesn't meet any real or special difficulties, and as long as we get some kind of understanding of what we are doing from our neighbors, our allies in the region, without out of the region, all these aspects, including the Israeli internal situation, have influence on the political decision makers. But what is leading, or the main leading point, is the operational achievements and the information that we have that is the base of more activities on the ground. Once the commanders, together with the Minister of Defense mainly, will decide that we achieved most of what they wanted, and from now on, the price might be higher than the benefits, they will decide to stop it, of course, with the permission of the political leadership.
Look, what's your take? I'm talking about what's happening on the ground. And again, to our viewers, I want to just remind our viewers, we're seeing the images live from the scene in Tel Aviv here. It looks like they're starting to tape off the scene and go over the evidence here. This is such a fresh scene of a terror attack. Some 3 people in critical condition, others wounded, a car ramming, possibly stabbing here. So just to chime in again to our viewers who are coming in wondering what they're seeing on the screen. Look, Itamar, thanks for being with us still on this. From what we're seeing on the ground in Jenin as well, you know, it's been reported that there's been a lowering of the violent resistance of the gunmen coming out to take on the IDF. Since last night, even a bit of quiet in some places, a bit surprising. What does that say to you? That the effectiveness of the operation, or that perhaps the IDF got an upper hand here? These organizations in Jenin weren't ready for this major fight.
I think that the activists, terrorists among the people in Jenin understood that the IDF, together with the other forces, will go in to look after them. They know that it will come, first of all, because it's something that is happening almost every night in the West Bank. Secondly, they understood that they can expect that in the coming short time, we will have to launch a much bigger activity or operation, if you want to call it operation. What was exactly the timing? I believe that they didn't have any idea about the exact timing, but it's not really important because I said they are ready to do whatever they can do to try to attack us. And I don't think that the decision of somebody to send this truck, light truck, into Tel Aviv is based on what we have done or we didn't do in Jenin.
But again, attacks that emerge all the time. I want to remind our viewers, and I want to chime in here tomorrow just to explain the visuals again that our viewers are taking in here. This is the fresh scene of that attack here at this point. The attacker's car roped off and being heavily examined here. We've seen some of the dogs approaching it. You can see various security personnel exploring really every inch of this vehicle, making sure there's no explosives, trying to discern any evidence they can from this situation to either deem it safe or gather information and figure things out.
I think that you're right. They check the vehicle now to make sure that we will not have any, or they will not have any surprise when they will take this truck to another place. And this is the usual procedure.
And I want to come back into our other guests here. So Rafael Yerushalmi and Abati Leventhal in the studio with us. Rafael, a little more details emerging here as we gathered this 23-year-old resident of the West Bank who it appears, from what I'm hearing, was in Israel on a legal work permit here. These called these humanitarian permits. Now, that's been a glaring aspect to me of this operation in the last 2 days, that we didn't, clamp down on other areas, that there were still workers coming out of Gaza, coming out of the West Bank, Palestinians coming into Israel. Does this, bite that policy essentially? Is there a reckoning now on the decision to have, kept this in place while an operation was taking place? Do you think there's some internal criticism on something like this?
I don't want somebody to criticize, but really the calculation is simple. We want to dissociate the Palestinian people from the terrorists. We don't want to put them in the same basket, and we don't want to punish everybody for only one part of the population perpetrating these attacks. So it is the price we have to pay and the risk we have to take. to let these workers come into Israel.
The first time we should
you have to remind that apart from that risk that you have here, you have the huge advantage of having thousands and thousands of Palestinians having a better way of life, having money coming in, which is good for the Palestinian economy. All this in the long run is also good for us, for Israel. It allows the Palestinians to see when they are in these areas like today, they see how the Israelis live, they see how Arab Israelis, Muslims live in Israel, how much better they live than in the territories, and this will encourage them to be closer to us, to try and have some peace with us. And we have to take that risk. Remember that even when we do close, like for the festivals, when we do close the territories, there are still some guys who can manage to get through and perpetrate an attack. In this particular case, the vehicles would indicate that the person has a permit, knows the area, was working on some building site around there. It was also easier maybe for him to move around because he has this working vehicle that looks, you know, innocent.
Raphael, I have to jump out here. Our correspondent, Pia Steckelbach's gone out to cover this situation for us. Pia, give us the latest. You know, what do we know? We're still trying to gather so much, you know, from the videos we're seeing, from the various reports coming in. Update us. What's happening?
Can I have a comment?
In a minute tomorrow. We'll have to come back. I have a moment here with our live correspondent. We'll definitely have more time for analysis. But Pia, what can you tell us the latest from the scene?
Right, David, reports are still incoming as we speak, but what we know is that there are about 7 injured, 2 in a severe condition who are in hospital right now. We are here at the scene. As you can see, there are really dozens of police cars here in the background. You can see the bus station where apparently the car ramming attack happened. We're also, according to the preliminary reports, talking about a stabbing attack, but you can see that there are dozens of police cars here at the scene. Also, of course, first responders, emergency services. There are lots of residents who cannot get to their apartments as of now, of course. The attack happened in less than an hour ago, so that there's really not a lot of information out there. The attacker seems to be a young man from the area south of Hebron. There are, again, many questions that need to be asked now. How did he get here? This is a northern part of Tel Aviv, a quite residential area. Here you can see Main Street. The attack apparently happened close to a bus stop where people were at, probably waiting for their bus. But this is not the usual busy Tel Aviv area like Dizengoff, where we have seen attacks in the past. So again, many questions need to be asked here. We are hearing from the hospital again that there is at least 2 people in serious condition. We are also hearing that the police commissioner, Kobi Shabtai, is slated to arrive here to the scene very soon. This is a common practice to get an impression of what has happened here. But as of now, the police forces are still here on the ground to investigate what has happened. We are talking about what seems to be a ramming attack and a stabbing attack. The assailant has been shot. He has been shot by what seemed to be bystanders who were armed. We have seen video material of him laying on the ground and being shot. Again, we're talking of about 5 to 7 people injured, some in moderate, some in light condition, and 2 in serious condition who are in the hospital right. And now, again, police forces here. We also saw helicopters in the sky circling here above the scene. Also, when we went here to the location where we were in the car, there were police cars rushing to the scene throughout the city. And this is really an immense presence of police forces who are still investigating the scene, regular traffic police and also border police forces here, David.
Pia, thanks for the updates out there from the scene. You got out there quickly. This is, again, as Pia mentioned, just happened this hour. As we were on air, this horrendous scene emerged here. This is the latest terror attack inside Israel, this being a car ramming, reportedly with a stabbing element as well. The attacker driving into people on that busy sidewalk and then getting out to continue his killing spree there. So far, no one reported dead among the victims of this attack here. The assailant was, as Pia mentioned, shot dead by bystanders there at the scene, by civilians legally permitted to carry defensive weapons. This is the reason. And now we have that down, and again, some people fighting for their lives right now in critical condition. So all eyes on this situation as we're looking at it here and continuing to cover it. And again, with our correspondents in the studio, and I want to bring Batya Leventhal back into this, the international community. Look, obviously, when things flare up here, the world's watching, the world's paying attention, the headlines, you know, are running. So we know this is another incident. With the attention already on us with this Jenin operation, look, how does this, you know, get taken in by the world in the context of what's happening by Jenin? It's a complex story, but does this Is this one that gets twisted? I mean, how does this get reported? How do things like this get looked at by the international community?
Context, the magic word. That is literally what we're seeing right now. And as you were busy connecting with Pierre, I was busy having a look at some of the international headlines, of which the stories were
starting to emerge.
Palestinian man shot dead in Tel Aviv after car accident. Now, there's so much wrong with a headline like this that is being pushed into international media. And again, it leads into the discussion of what we were talking about, this mass misunderstanding and not being able to put a clear distinction. The media, and ourselves included, have to be liable and responsible for calling a spade a spade. This was not a Palestinian man, this was a terrorist. So let's begin with that if they're going to start off at least the headline in that sense. And it didn't, it's very difficult, we know here at the studios as well, to fit into 50 characters the fact that a Palestinian terrorist had rammed into innocent bystanders in Tel Aviv in a high-tech area because of a response as to what's happening in Jenin. From a production perspective, I get that. It is very difficult to fit a story like that into 50 characters. However, when tasked with that, that's where the context becomes important. So then it needs to be stated that this was a terror attack. It needs to then have context within the article that this could have been in response, some kind of an anger approach as well from a Palestinian that was within the West Bank that got a permit, as you mentioned, on a humanitarian ground. So again, there's all these different factors that, with a lot of the criticism and condemnation that's coming out at Israel, and some rightfully so. However, there are instances where these things need to be brought to attention. This is a situation where we had someone who came in, the reports saying that he came into Israel on a humanitarian ground. Yeah. Okay, Israel has to be recognized for allowing residents that aim to harm citizens coming into its country on a humanitarian perspective, which is never acknowledged in these kinds of articles. And again, with what's going on in Jenin and how this is all tied together, I think the biggest question is probably so much actually around the Palestinian Authority and the factions within Gaza. As Raphael clearly pointed out, Hamas didn't take responsibility, but they did call this a heroic action, which brings to the fore again of, can we see copycat attacks when youngsters, Palestinian youngsters that have a fortune of anger and fury within them, have no one to turn to that is not somehow involved in armed resistance when you have an incredibly weak Palestinian Authority. And that's why a lot of these analysts, experts will tell you the operation in Jenin is one of two fronts. One from a military perspective, but from a political perspective, the IDF is going in there to try and assist the Palestinian Authority from getting it from weak to strong so that they can help root out and actually be a viable political force for Palestinians.
That's a critical point made. The Palestinian Authority, such an important backdrop element of everything the IDF's doing out in the West Bank. Look, again, images from the scene here. I want to keep coming back to it as we discuss the situation. And Itamar Yar, I think you're still with us. One of our guests, well, we'll come back. He's not with us in this moment, but certainly I know we cut him off from making a comment before, but plenty to say right now. This situation obviously unfolding. We're getting some more information about the perpetrator, the attacker in this terror attack that just happened here on the streets of northwest Tel Aviv. Again, a busy lunch hour shattered by him driving a vehicle down here, ramming as many people as he could on the sidewalk there, from what we can tell, and apparently emerging from that vehicle to perpetrate more attack here with a knife. Many people being described now, some of the victims being described as having stab wounds as well. So this unfolding as we speak, three in serious condition here. So this is still underway, it's still being assessed. A 23-year-old resident, though, from the South Hebron Hills in the West Bank. And to draw in more angles of this, and Raphael, I'll come back to you on this. Look, as we talk about the international perspective and just the elements, the various elements of pressure on the Israeli government at this point, I think it's safe to say this government has been operating in a bit of a deficit of international credibility. They've been struggling with this, especially in the Palestinian arena, especially in light of events, in the last weeks. I want to say, for all the labels of terror put on settler activities, none of them got in a car and did something like this in a Palestinian town. So we are seeing, this again being a harsh, wake-up call again to the realities of this conflict. But given the government struggles in this, international arena, does that affect activity right now, especially in light of an attack like this? How much is that factoring into what the government's doing in the West Bank?
I don't think it affects the activity. The assessment is a professional security assessment, independent from politics, because of the mere fact that we are facing an unprecedented wave of terror activity. of late, and it's been intensifying in the last few days. So the government had to react, had to take measures, had to listen to the experts of the security services and the army. That decision being taken, it might come at a good timing for the present government because of all the other difficulties it's facing. So it's taking the focus away from quite a few controversies that are happening right now, controversies that also really image abroad. Right now, I would just complete what was said about the abroad reactions, that you have to remember that context is really the problem, and you have to remember that even when there is a terrorist attack in a foreign capital, whether it will be in New York, London, or Paris, it will take the local police days, if not hours, if not days, to say it's a terrorist attack. Even though it's a Muslim shouting Allah Akbar, they will say, well, maybe very careful. They are walking, they're very afraid because if they acknowledge too quickly, then there will be copycat, then there will be more retaliation. So they're very afraid of anything they're saying about these terrorist attacks. When it comes to Israel, they're much less shy because attacking Israel doesn't cost anything to anybody. And unfortunately, right now, we cannot operate on all the fronts. We know that the Israelis are not good at hasbara, at explaining, at having a good image abroad. They're not professional. There isn't a budget. There is not enough manpower in the Foreign Affairs Ministry or any other ministry to do the job. People who are put there in this position to do hasbara for Israel are not professional. They are the cousin of somebody, and the job is not done. So we know that. On the other hand, I think that the general public in the street, wherever you go in the world, is not stupid, and they can see what is happening. They know there are terrorist attacks. You are here in the street. It could be your street anywhere in the world, and you get run over and you get attacked. Then you have the police come in. I don't think a normal citizen, will react.
Tel Aviv residents, this frequently has been their street. Again, Tel Aviv, no stranger in the last couple of years to attacks of this nature. This one is still gathering the information on it. That's where we take you now. Again, we're watching this live, and our correspondent Pia Stekelbach is there at the scene of the attack. Again, Pia, any updates? Our viewers likely tuning in right now, just getting caught up to speed on what's taking place, our regular programming thrown to the wind. So give us a bit of an update here on just what's gone on in the last hour there.
Well, David, police here on the ground is definitely also still gathering information. As far as what we know now, that about an hour ago, a car ramming has occurred here. We are in the north of Tel Aviv. This is a very a residential neighborhood. This is not your typical scene that Tel Aviv has seen for similar attacks in the past. This is not Dizengoff. This is not the center. We're in a residential area. The ramming attack happened close to a bus stop here in that street right behind me. There are still dozens of police cars here. We're talking about 7 people injured, 2 of them in a severe condition. They are in the hospital as of now. We still also see ambulance cars here, and as I mentioned, major police presence here. We're talking about regular traffic police. We're also talking about border police, still ambulance cars here on the ground, and residents here who are were not able to access their apartments here as investigations are still going on. We've also seen helicopters here in the sky and major police presence also in the city. Police cars still rushing to the scene here. The police commissioner, David Kobi-Shabtai, is expected to reach the scene very soon to also get an update on the situation, on what has been going on here on the ground. We also expect the police spokesperson to arrive here soon to get also more information. We know that the attacker came from the area south of Hebron.
We see the police chief is there in the backdrop here, just arrived on the scene, so he's making some comments. We'll bring those to our viewers in a minute. But yeah, as you mentioned, a West Bank resident, the attacker.
And the Israeli security forces have kind of been prepared for a possible reaction to that major operation that happened in Jenin yesterday, where 10 Palestinians were killed. Both Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas have announced a reaction to that major operation. Hamas and PIJ called upon especially youth to join what they call resistance. Now, we've also already heard from Hamas that they declared this attack as a reaction to what has happened in Jenin. They did not claim responsibility, but they definitely hailed this attack here here. We know that the assailant has been shot, possibly by armed bystanders here. We know that he's a young man from the area south of Hebron. Of course, as always, many questions need to be answered now. How did he get here to that location in northern Tel Aviv? Was he, as of what we know now, it seems like he was here illegally. Those things need to be investigated now. Major police presence here, still a location. The police commissioner, also the police spokesperson, here on the scene to give us soon some updates on what background information the police and the intelligence system already has, David.
Certainly a lot to digest, a lot happening. Pia, thanks for the updates here. We are going to step out for a break in a moment here. Just to update, though, 8 people wounded, 3 in serious condition. We'll bring you more from the police commissioner when we come back. We have to step out for a short break, catch our breath on the situation. Again, a terror attack in Tel Aviv a short while ago. Here we'll bring you all the details. Staying on the subject when we come back. Break.
Today, I'm making panzerotti, an Italian street food pastry originating from the region of Puglia. Panzerotti is often compared to other turnovers from different parts of the world, but I think it's a unique pastry. Especially our panzerotti that has dough that's made with a secret recipe. When deep fried, the dough does not absorb the oil, and that's how it remains crunchy on the outside and pillowy like a cloud in the inside. We're in the Carmel market in Tel Aviv. Our place, Coco's Panzerotti, is named after Coco, a family member and the founder of the restaurant. Coco was born and raised in Parma, in Italy, where he fell in love with Italian cuisine. Growing up, he discovered panzerotti and decided to bring it to Israel and opened the first Israeli panzerotti place. He worked on his recipe for a long time and introduced it to the public only when he was satisfied with the final result. The classic panzerotti is filled with tomatoes and mozzarella cheese. Here, we came up with some more creative fillings based on Italy's iconic plates. We have our cacio e pepe, which is a variation on the popular Roman pasta dish. We also make sweet panzerotti filled with Nutella and mascarpone cheese, or creme pâtissière and berries. I think the secret to a great panzerotti is using only the freshest, best quality ingredients. This is one of the reasons we chose to base our restaurant in the middle of the market. The combination of high-quality products with just the right recipe makes this so-called simple pastry taste perfect.
I think it's a great opportunity for all Australians to get behind something that is going to make this country better, and particularly for the Indigenous people that deserve it.
Is changing. Old alliances make way for new partnerships.
Bigger threats lead to new relationships, and shared goals mean new opportunities.
We speak to those who know the inside story and are at the heart of the changes.
Don't get caught up with the same old story.
Find out what's happening in Middle East Now.
Middle East Now on I-24 News.
The I-24 News team of talented correspondents are working hard for you. They're in the markets, on the streets, in the battlefields, getting the pulse of the story. Tune in for Beyond the Headlines to see how the top stories of the week are affecting real people. No commentary, no debate, just the best stories presented by our best journalists.
Glad you're still with us here. We are in breaking mode here on I-24 News. A terror attack last hour on the northwest side of Tel Aviv here. This was a 23-year-old Palestinian resident of the West Bank around Hebron who was somehow in possession of the vehicle you see in the center frame there. That he drove off the side of the road, car ramming attack, injuring at least 8 people on the side of the road there, people walking during the busy lunch hour, 3 of them in serious condition, fighting for their lives at this moment. The assailant was shot dead at the scene, by all accounts that we've been able to gather, by civilians in the area who had legal handgun permits. They're defensive weapons for this exact type of scenario that unfortunately plays out far too often in Israel. So again, this is what you're seeing. These are live images from the scene. This is all taking place in the last hour. A terror attack being perpetrated here by a Palestinian from the West Bank who, by initial reports and accounts, was in possession of a legal work permit to enter Israel. That's an important aspect of this story, I believe. In the last 2 days, this has been a major counter-terror operation underway in the heart of Jenin. The IDF did not lock down the rest of the West Bank. There was not a collective sort of punishment, as many would frame it. Tens of thousands of people still coming into Israel from the West Bank and the Gaza Strip in the last 2 days here to work in Israel, to do whatever it is in Israel. In this case, perpetrate a terror attack as well. So a lot of questions still to be answered exactly around the nature of what played out here. But from the reports, again, car ramming and reports of stabbing wounds on some of those that are brought into the hospital as well. So we're still waiting for updates from moment to moment as well. But there's been a lot to analyze aside from this attack. Again, day 2 of a major and intensive wide-scale counter-terror operation by the Israel Defense Force in Jenin, which has become a hotbed of terror in recent years. The Palestinian Authority barely leveraging any authority in Jenin in these last years. It's become a vacuum for many armed groups, jihadists among them. The IDF uncovering troves of weapons and explosives factories in there as well, and going after what's become considered a hotbed, a den of terror in the West Bank. Most of the attacks in recent months and years, though, at least have been contained to the West Bank. The attackers not able to get this far into Israel, this being an exception clearly again. So we'll keep you updated on all of that. Continuing our discussion here, I'm still joined in the studio by security analyst Rafael Yerushalmi and Yaakov Lapin joining us as well here. So frequent guest of ours coming on. Look, Yaakov, since you're fresh on the scene with us here or joining the broadcast, I want to bring you into the conversation here. Look, where does this fit? You know, obviously all eyes have been on Jenin, and concern in the background, in the back of everyone's mind is, you know, something like this taking place. Now, many are saying, look, there's no connection to these 2 incidents. This is always a threat. This is ongoing. But what does it look like to you? What were your first thoughts, essentially, seeing this happen today in Tel Aviv?
I think they are connected, at least in the sense that we know that when there are significant IDF operations in the West Bank, that creates extra motivation for terrorists who are not necessarily part of an organization or a cell, but will feel that extra motivation to go out and implement an attack plan that has already been in their mind for a while. That's known from past precedent. So I don't think it's possible to disconnect these 2 incidents. Of course, the Shin Bet, the Israel police, will need to start figuring out whether this terrorist was acting on his own, was part of a cell. These are very important questions. But the bottom line is that the domestic terrorist threat, in other words, the ability of Palestinians from the West Bank or small groups of Arab Israelis who are radicalized and exposed to terrorist propaganda to attack within Israeli cities is always a threat, and this is a threat that goes up directly in line with tensions that go up in other arenas, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip.
And Yaakov, following up a bit on one known aspect of this, actually, Yaakov, we're going to come back to you. I got to go back to the scene here right now. Again, this is such an unfolding event, and we have our correspondent there. But definitely get more analysis from you. Thanks for joining. Pia Steckelbach is our correspondent on the scene right now. Again, Pia, just a short while ago, I know right before we popped out to break, I think Kobi Shabtai, the police commissioner, showed up at the scene there. Like, what are they telling us so far? Bring our viewers up to speed who may be just joining us.
Well, details, David, are of course still coming in. We're talking about an attack that happened only about an hour ago. Massive police presence still here. Dozens of police, regular traffic police, as well as border police and ambulance car. As we are standing right in front of the bus station where the ramming attack happened. Police are still investigating the car, investigating the background. We're talking about 7 or 8 injured. At least 3 of them are in severe condition in the hospital. And I'm standing here with the spokesperson for the international media of the Israeli police, Din Elston. Thank you very much for being here. First of all, what can you tell us about the circumstances? Are we only talking about a car ramming attack? Because there were initial reports of also a stabbing. What can you tell us about what has happened here?
Well, the first thing that I want to say is that the police, we have our deepest sympathies extending into the families of the victims. This was a horrendous attack that took place today, and we're not going to allow it to take place on our watch. As you saw, a vehicle arrived from southbound to northbound and just began running over pedestrians. The individual then came at a stop at the bus stop that's right behind us, got out of his vehicle, and started attempting to stab civilians with a knife. Luckily, there was a civilian who was armed, and he managed to neutralize this terrorist with his firearm. And right now, large police forces have arrived. It's still a developing situation, so we're getting more details as it unfolds. But the police commissioner, Yaakov Shabtai, has arrived. The commander of the Tel Aviv district is also here, and we're getting all the information for this event that took place.
Now, we know that the assailant came from the West Bank, from the region south of the city of Hebron. We hear that he was here legally, had a medical treatment to do here in the city. What can you tell us about his background and whether he was here legally or not?
So I'll tell you, Pia, because this is a terror attack and it's unfolding, we're gathering more information. I don't want to speak to the specifics of this individual, this terrorist. What I can tell you is 100% it's a terrorist. And this terrorist came and he came to kill civilians. It's something that's disgusting. It's something that our police forces work night and day to prevent these type of things. We see it across the country, and we're not going to allow terror attacks like these to take place, especially right here in our front yard.
Now, after that major operation, the Israeli Operation Jenin yesterday, the Israeli security establishment was ready for possible revenge attacks. We have also heard announcements from the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, from Hamas. Hamas also hailed this attack. What can you tell us about the Israeli security establishment in terms of how it prepares itself for what might come next?
Well, we have a very large array of technological means. We have a large array of forces that are spread out throughout the country. The Israel Police is a national police force. That means we have the Israel Police, we have Yassam, we have the Border Police, and they're ready for any incident that takes place. We can't be at every corner at every minute, but the second something happens, you see we have a large force of police officers that arrived, and we're here to really bring this case to justice.
Okay. Can you tell us anything about the works that are happening here on the ground? We see a massive police presence here. As I said, dozens of police cars. I even saw a helicopter circulating here above the sky. What can you tell us in terms of what is going on here as of now on the ground?
So when any terror incident takes place, we want to investigate everything, where the individual came from, if somebody assisted him, all different avenues, and that's part of the case that's unfolding. We have the helicopter in the air to make sure that there's no other events taking place in the perimeter. We have dogs coming to sniff and make sure that there's no explosives. There's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes once the police arrive. The police are making sure that all the civilians around us right now are safe, and we have investigators who are coming to see the exact details of what took place.
Okay, thank you very much. Din Elston, the spokesperson for the international media of the Israeli police. Thank you very much. Thank you. As of now, the attack happened about an hour ago. We are talking about 7 or 8 injured. We're talking about 3 who are severely injured who are right now being treated in hospitals here nearby. As of now, massive police forces are still investigating the scene. This is seen as a direct reaction to Israel's operation in Jenin that killed 10 Palestinians yesterday, most of them Palestinian militants, but also had a huge impact on the civilian population in the refugee camp. So Hamas has already hailed this attack here as a reaction to what has happened in Jenin yesterday. As of now here, residents are standing surrounding us, also looking at the scene. They're currently not able to return to the area here as the area here is being sealed off. Also, that road here is blocked as investigations here on the ground are going on as we speak, and Israeli police, as we just heard, is trying to gain as much information as possible. David.
Peter Steckelbach at the scene of the attack. Thanks for the updates and great access to the spokesperson of the police there. So we got basically all the information we can squeeze out of them at this point for our viewers here. This is such a fresh incident. And again, Pia, thanks for the reports there. So we'll stay up to speed on any developments as they emerge. We're joined now, another guest coming on right now. We're joined by Ram Ben Barak. He's a lawmaker with Yesh Atid and the former deputy director of the Mossad. So thanks for being with us. Look, Ram, politically here now, is there wall-to-wall backing for intensive IDF activity going after the dens of terror in the West Bank, such as Jenin?
Well, unfortunately, we cannot stop the all terror attack. The motivation to do a terror attack is here, and it will not stop. Not for sure, not because of the operation in Jenin. The operation in Jenin is very important, and we might succeed to do it, to make it more not how to say it. It will be effective to raise down to bring down the terror attack, but the motivation is here, and we need to understand that it will happen from time to time and be ready for that.
Rob, at this point, if you're still with us here, now there's a phone connection. We're dealing with this. What changes now this attack took place? Is there a change of thought within the government or by the security forces about how things need to act differently? Might they close down work permits, for example, from the West Bank?
I don't think that it will influence what is happening in Jenin now, because we have to see from where the terrorist is coming. Is it came from Jenin, or is it from other place in the West Bank? We don't know yet, but I don't think that it will influence the operation in Jenin. We will have to see what we can do more to see that there will be no terror attack. Especially, we trust the intelligence, but not always we have this intelligence like it happened now in Tel Aviv.
True point there. Ron Ben Barak, lawmaker from the Yesh Atid Party and the former deputy director of Mossad. Thanks for joining us on this.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Look, I want to give you a little update from the hospital here. Is one of the doctors from Bellington Hospital treating some of the wounded here. Let's get a little update.
3 injured people from the incident arrived at the trauma room at Bellington Hospital. 2 of them are in moderate condition and 1 is in serious condition. They're being treated at this time and are undergoing tests. We will know more details later about their condition.
And again, we'll keep you updated. This all unfolding in the last hour. But I still have my guest, Rafael Yerushalmi, in the studio with me here. Rafael, Hamas has sort of come into the picture here today around this, at least just in terms of their comments around this. They're sort of championing it, celebrating it, however lone wolf this may have been. Suddenly they've inserted themselves into this narrative and been fairly quiet, at least up until this point in the last 2 days in Jenin. What was expected? What were the concerns around Hamas? And where does this fit in potentially? And what reaction or not they may have around what's happening in the West Bank?
The general assessment was that as a retaliation or to save face, the Hamas would shoot a couple of rockets in open ground
based on
somewhere.
The operation in Jenin right now, you're saying?
Yeah. So, yes. As a retaliation for the operation in Jenin, we expected the Hamas to, they usually do that when there is a strong action of the IDF in the West Bank. From Gaza, we can expect a couple of rockets from Hamas or the Islamic Jihad. They might be spared that trouble by the fact that the retaliation is going on. There are Israeli civilians who are badly wounded in hospital, and that they might be sufficient. It might cool things down a bit on the Gaza front, or not. We don't know. We are not in their heads, that's for sure. But I think the fact that they praise the operation, so they don't really claim it, but they still take the credit, and they can, because it's because of their propaganda of hatred and incitement that these things do happen, and that youngsters from the Palestinian people from the West Bank get up and do perpetrate attacks. So let's hope that this will suffice as a retaliation, and let's hope that none of the wounded condition will deteriorate. Unfortunately, in the coming days we will have to expect more of that. We will have to expect copycat. It is a problem also to see that a person who got a medical permit to come into Israel, use that to perpetrate an attack. But then it's also an assessment there to see we cannot stop all the other persons with similar permits or with work permits from coming into Israel. We have to take that chance. It's a risk we knew we would take also when we launched that action in Jenin. 1 hour after this action was launched, we could expect all the Palestinian factions to go up in arms against this action. So far, actually, it's been relatively quiet in Hebron.
Actually, right?
Yeah, in Ramallah. I mean, you can have a cup of coffee today in Ramallah and not feel anything about what's going on in Jenin. Very quiet. Also quiet because the Palestinian Authority has control over Ramallah and doesn't over Jenin, which is one of the lessons of this operation, meaning we weakened the Palestinian Authority too much. It was not good for us in a way. When they lost control, we lost control as well. And then we have to come in and do the job instead of them. So now there's second thoughts in the government that maybe, and it was an advice given by the Biden administration from the start, that maybe we should strengthen the PA and not weaken it.
Seems to be, the current thinking in this. And Yaakov Lapin, I know you've been with us through all this here. Thanks for hanging in there. To bring it back to you on this, and many asking in terms of this operation in Jenin, what the end point is. Might we see Palestinian Authority security forces back on the streets of Jenin, around the refugee camp there, the focus of these areas of operation right now? Is that realistic? The Palestinian Authority can be brought back into these areas?
Well, that would be the optimal scenario going forward, but there's a big question mark over whether the PA is currently able to do that, because at the end of the day, most of the gunmen, most of the terrorist factions and PIJ and Hamas and affiliated gunmen in Jenin are in place. They will remain in place after this operation is over. And, a little bit of background about Jenin, this is a city where about 25% of the population is affiliated with PIJ, and a further 20% is affiliated with Hamas. So this is a city with a strong Islamist stronghold, and that's one of the reasons why the PA found it so difficult to hang on there in the first place, and why its authority evaporated and why it essentially became missing in action. So I'm not ruling it out, but I think it would be difficult. It would probably have to be done through phases. It would also be important, I think, for the PA's legitimacy, for it not to be seen riding, figuratively speaking, on the Israeli armored vehicles, so to speak, back into Jenin. It has to be seen as an independent Palestinian process. So it's complicated, but certainly I think from Israel's security perspective, that would be the optimal scenario of a PA that's come back to rule in Jenin, rather than the IDF needing to go in and degrade the terrorist capabilities that have developed there.
Look, there's already reports, Yaakov, coming out of various parts of the West Bank of open celebration, not just Hamas saying, that they're so proud of this, that this is a bit more widespread displays emerging right now of sort of jubilation, celebration around this type of attack. That's common. I want to mention to our viewers here, unfortunately, as grim and horrifying as that is, to see things like street parties and candies handed out to children, fireworks displays when innocents are killed in the streets of Tel Aviv, for example. But how on edge is the country right now, Yaakov, for more of these types of attacks, for more to be emerging in this moment with, heightened tension around the operation in the West Bank?
Well, I think, if we zoom out a little bit, we've been through waves of these attacks just in the past 2 years. It's risen and dropped in line with motivations, with the ability of the defense establishment to seal the West Bank security barrier, and improved intelligence and more offensive security raids throughout the West Bank, particularly in the northern West Bank and the Samaria region. So this is part of that escalation trend, which has been afflicting Israeli streets for at least a year and a half, and what caused, the IDF to launch Operation Breaking the Wave in the first place. So I would put that in this wider context. I don't think that we need to start thinking about the fact that this is going to be happening every day. I think the defense establishment, the intelligence community, is very well equipped to detect and prevent most of these attacks, but there is no 100% guarantee. And the fact that this terrorist was apparently, reportedly, able to exploit a permit, a medical permit, giving him access to enter Israel, is certainly something that will have to lead to an investigation, looking at the screening process for this individuals, what lessons can be learned. And again, let's zoom out. Just yesterday, over 100,000 Palestinians, including thousands from Jenin, by the way, thousands of Palestinians from Jenin came into Israel to work yesterday and today. This is as the operation is happening. And so this differentiation between Palestinian civilians and terrorists is a core aspect of the IDF's approach to dealing with Palestinian terrorism, with the thinking being that if non-combatants and civilians are allowed to go about their daily routine and allowed to make a living and face minimal disruption, that actually serves Israel's security need. And I think that's going to continue with a very, very meticulous investigation into what went wrong in this particular screening process.
And certainly not, and unfortunately not the first time by a long shot that these permits have been exploited to perpetrate attacks. We've seen horrendous examples of that in the past. Yaakov, thanks for the analysis so far. I just want to bring our viewers up to speed here. If you're tuning in right now, these are the scenes, the images live from the scene of the terror attack here. This is still so fresh. Happened last hour as this young Palestinian man, 23 years old, been identified as coming from the South Hebron Hills, drove a car into pedestrians on the side of the road there. For now, 8 injured, 3 in critical condition. The assailant then emerging from his vehicle with a knife, stabbing people on the sidewalk there before, again, according to reports, an Israeli civilian with a handgun, permitted to carry that defensive weapon, was able to stop. It may have been more than one, in fact, able to stop this attacker, already being celebrated here by National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's led a charge to put guns in more people's hands around the country, qualified individuals. I want to mention that, people pass certain screening in order to carry weapons and ostensibly stop attacks like this when they happen, as we saw today. So he's already touting the civilian here as a hero who stopped this attack, and I think that's clear for anyone looking in here that that person was able to stop further bloodshed on the scene here. But just another element coming into the picture today, and draws us back at least to thinking about the government here, the current government. And Raphael in studio with me here. Look, the domestic unrest, let's call it that, the street protests that have come to characterize the optics around Israel so much in the last 6 months. In the eyes of the enemy, in the eyes of these terror groups in the Palestinian areas, is it a weakened version of Israel that they're seeing? Are they emboldened, perhaps, seeing a bit of domestic unrest or lack of faith, perhaps, in the government here? What does it lead to more terror, essentially? What does that do to this arena?
Yes, of late, the terrorists have been emboldened by the fact that the country is divided. It's clear that there is quite a bit of a turmoil in the Israeli society. They interpret this as a weakening of the Zionist state. The Iranians have claimed it loud and clear and said, look, it's the end of Israel. They are self-destructing. Our enemies are feasting on these things, and this action that is being now led in Jenin shows that there has...
I have to chime in, Raphael. This is image. We're just getting this footage here now. I think we'll be able to replay it. This is some security footage of the moment of the attack. I think if you're watching this here, you see when the car impacted that bus stop. Again, that bench and bus stop sitting right there. We're just getting this here through Israeli media. This is the security footage from a restaurant there, and here's the attack unfolding. My goodness, as we see that actually taking place, you can see the driver just cut away there. But if we can get back to that footage, again, shows the moment the car hits the sidewalk. Pay attention here in the upper left of your screen. Wow, look out for that when you're on your scooter riding through the city, of course. But here, emerging from the car, as we keep watching here, is a waitress clearing the tables. Still not really sure, obviously, what took place in here, whether this was just an accident or a terror attack. That becomes clear right here as he emerges from the car and starts stabbing and attacking people on the sidewalk. You can see that playing out right here as we go. Here he is with a knife in his hand, stabbing those at a cafe indiscriminately. The hallmark of terror, of Palestinian terror in Israeli cities, again here, the indiscriminate nature of it, the sudden, horrifying and terrorizing nature of it as well. 3 people in critical condition. You see one of those wounded right there from a stab wound. This is a bystander walking on the street, staggering around looking for help. Dramatic imagery, just to give you a glimpse of how this incident played out. That attacker, though, thankfully was neutralized, taken out, killed by a civilian nearby who happened to have a handgun permit. So again, saving the day here, that massive impact again. This dramatic footage just hitting the airwaves here in Israel. This happened last hour, Palestinian terror attack. The driver of that truck, 23-year-old man, been identified as a 23-year-old man from the area of Hebron, was in Israel legally. So he was here on a medical permit. That's being the tragic consequence here, ruining it for so many, tens of thousands, by some accounts, over 100,000 Palestinians entering Israel from the West Bank and the Gaza Strip in the last day to work and to go to hospitals, essentially. No collective punishment, sort of shut down on the West Bank, even in the midst of this ramped-up, wide-scale counter-terror operation that's taking place in Jenin as we speak. That city becoming a hotbed for terror organizations and the lack of any Palestinian Authority security force control. So again, live images from this footage now, certainly dramatic on the airwaves now, just emerging, and we're keep you updated here on the channel throughout the day, whatever emerges around this incident. Updates on the wounded, updates on the situation, and of course, updates from this ongoing counter-terror operation. The IDF still deeply embedded in the city of Jenin as we speak. Brigades of special forces and commandos, coupled with major intelligence assets on the ground, still seeking out terror infrastructure in the heart of Jenin. Nothing simple about that. That's where we started the broadcast. We're ending it here some 2 hours later, covering this attack that just took place in Tel Aviv a short while ago. So for now, that's our updates on my end. Colleagues to take over at the top of the hour, though. Thanks for joining us and our portion of it. All the updates right here on I-24 News, and we'll keep you updated again. The day of terror in Israel, IDF operations ramped up. Stay tuned.
I work at I-24 News since 2013, since the channel was established, and I'm the defense correspondent in English since 2018. As the defense correspondent, and also in my previous roles, I was hundreds of times in Sderot and the Gaza border communities when red alert sirens sounded, meaning that rockets are incoming and we all have to run to the shelters. Most of the time, the rockets were intercepted, there were no casualties, no damages, and that was my report. But there was one time in the city of Sderot which made me realize we are all wrong. My colleagues and I ran to the shelter, again, but with us ran a group of children and their mothers. The children were crying. The mothers were supposed to help them, but they were also crying. That is when I realized that what is the work for me is life for them. That's where I understood that there is damage, even